54 days old and already a couch potato.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Right. Like his grandpa.
Couch potato, right? See the t-shirt that's Uncle got him? See it there? Come on, stand up.
Says,
Get there.
says
Who happens, and believe me, he just happened.
There's the base portion. Dad, how many trips have you made to Lowe's this weekend?
Well, they've now cut me off and taken back so much stuff returned. I think they cut you off after about 50 returns. I think I'm already past it.
He's honestly at least 6. He's definitely been there at least 6 times back and forth. Have you ever had a day where everything changes? It's like one day everything's fine and you're just living your life and you're doing your thing and you think you know where you're headed. You think you know what tomorrow holds. But then something happens and it's a game changer.
Sam and I had moved from Indiana to Tennessee in 2008. Our youngest son, Ryan, and his wife, Selena, were starting a church in Chattanooga, and they also had started their family. So we headed south to help with the new church and our newest grandchild, Gannon. The move also put us closer to our oldest son, Scott, and his wife, Lisa, and our grandchildren there, Stephen and Peyton. This was a big step for us. We had both lived in Indiana all our lives, and we were leaving friends and family members. We were also moving our business, which we had owned for several years. But we made the move. We bought a house in Tennessee. We started fixing it up, and we began forging ahead with our plans. Then everything changed. It was the morning of February 27th, 2010. Sam was returning from a job site in Arkansas.
I've worked for Sam for a number of years, and on that day I'd relieved him in Arkansas. We do a process that repairs furnace linings in the steel industry, and we knew everything was good, everything was happening. The next time I spoke to him was at midnight that night. He had told me that he was in Nashville. We kind of cut up a little bit, joked, laughed like we normally do. Said he was about an hour and a half from Chattanooga.
He had driven 6 hours and was within one exit from home. When I heard the knock at the door, I didn't really think anything of it. I just figured he didn't want to dig for his key. So I opened the door, expecting to see Sam, of course. And instead, there was a police officer standing there. I was speechless. I couldn't move. It was one of those freeze frames in life that just doesn't register right away. And then the officer said, "There's been an accident, and they've airlifted him to Erlanger." At that point, at least I knew he was still alive, and I grabbed onto that. The officer was kind enough to offer to drive me to the hospital, and I immediately began leaving messages on Ryan's phone to meet us there and tried not to sound as panicked as I felt.
That morning I was supposed to be meeting with some of our church members for an outreach event. I didn't even look at my phone until after I'd gotten dressed and ready to go. And when I did, I noticed I'd missed several calls from my mom. I looked at Selena and I said, "Mom's tried to call me 5 times, something's wrong." I checked the voicemail, there were 2 messages. The first one, Mom just said, "Call me." Second one, she went into more detail, saying, "Your dad has been in an accident. I'm on my way to the hospital. Call me when you get this." And my knees buckled. I hit the floor. I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe. And then I finally got myself together enough to just get in the car and drive to the hospital.
Mom called me in Orlando that morning with news that Dad was in an accident. It was hard to follow because there were so many tests and procedures all happening at once. None of them sounded good, but you wanted to believe it was just precautionary. So you find yourself only half listening and half filling in your own blanks. Not knowing for sure, I headed to Chattanooga, telling myself the whole way up that I was overreacting and everything was fine.
Sam wasn't able to communicate with us those first few days. The doctors were running tests to figure out what they were actually dealing with. They felt that at that point he should have been moving. We just wanted to know that he was there and that he could hear us. That's when Scott, our oldest son, came up with an idea.
The only response Dad gave was to blink his eyelids. So I told Ryan we should ask him yes or no questions that he could answer with blinks. 1 blink for no, 2 blinks for yes. To test it out and make sure Dad was conscious, we started reciting simple math equations and asking Dad if they were correct. When he got every one of them right, Ryan decided he needed some evidence of our conversations. So he pulled out his camera and started recording. As soon as he did, we quickly realized Dad had not lost his sense of humor.
We are here with Sam May. He has been in ICU for 36 hours. Experiment number 1. He seems to be responding by blinks. 1 blink means no. 2 blinks mean yes. Sam May. 1 plus 1 is 2. Oh, I don't know. That was...
That was a no.
Experiment number 2.
He knows the camera's rolling.
All right. Are you playing me, Dad?
Of course he is.
All right. I'm turning the camera off. 1 plus 1 is 2. One plus 1 is 3. Okay. He did just the opposite when the camera was off. I promise you, he was 6 for 6, wasn't he?
He was.
He's playing us. This shows sense of humor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is breakthrough stuff. I mean, not just cognitive ability, but humor.
The most beautiful woman in the world. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
That was
3.
that 2 or 3?
3. That was definitely.
Now we know
without
what
a
3
doubt.
means.
We were making the best of a bad situation. As believers in Christ, that's what you do. Something happens, you trust God, and you hold His promises. And so that's what we were doing. But then we were tested even further when things got worse.
They didn't understand why Dad wasn't moving. His pelvis was shattered and he had all these injuries, but the doctors didn't think that would keep him from moving, so they ran a CAT scan to look for something else. That's when they found out that the accident had caused a condition that they called a brainstem stroke.
When they told us that Sam had had a stroke, we didn't quite understand the full impact, not at first. I'd seen people come through strokes before, and we just knew that he would too. What we didn't understand is that a brainstem stroke is not your typical stroke.
A brainstem stroke is just what it sounds like. It's a stroke that involves the lower part of the brain where all the signals come together to go and send signals to the body. As a result, when you have a stroke in that area, the symptoms can be quite profound and often can lead to being what we call a locked-in syndrome. In that situation, you're cognitively aware, everything is intact in terms of knowing what's going on and understanding, but you can't move. And oftentimes you're limited to doing nothing more than blinking your eyes. You can have varying degrees of involvement. They can be very severe where you truly are locked in, or you can have some movement but just have very global impairment of your motor functions. Because of its location, where it's the bottleneck where all these neural signals come together to get down to the body, it's very difficult for our brain to compensate for that, and so the reversibility is considerably less than a stroke that involves other parts of the brain.
I don't think I'll ever forget when it finally became clear to us what we were dealing with. We were in the room with Sam in ICU. There were a couple of nurses there, and one of the doctors walked in. His words just hung in the air. He said, "What you see is what you get." He's locked in. All he will ever be able to do is blink. He'll never move, he'll never eat, he'll never have facial expression, he'll never speak. When he said he'll never speak, it broke my heart. I never thought about not ever hearing Sam's voice again. That really hit hard. And I had to literally tell myself at that point to breathe.
I remember asking the nurse if there was somewhere we could go to just process this. And so they took us into a waiting room and we just wept. We just sat there, hugged together, and we cried.
The next 2 days were horrible. We listened to one doctor after another try to tell us that Sam's quality of life should be considered as we decide what to do. We began to read between the lines and finally understood what they were trying to tell us.
That day at the hospital, we had just come to terms with the fact that we were dealing with this accident. And now we were having to process this insurmountable obstacle that was before us. I mean, all the good things that we thought were before us, they suddenly weren't before us. This wasn't going to just go away. This wasn't going to get easier. This was going to get harder. And it was going to be much more difficult than we had originally anticipated. See, moments like that can change you. When you hear something, you see something, you experience something, and it can actually paralyze you. And what you find in that moment is that you're terrified of moving forward, and so mentally you just keep trying to go back. You wish things were the way they were before that moment. See, for my dad, that moment began right here. This was the site of the accident couple days after the accident, I came out and you could see the tire tracks. What had happened is my dad had fallen asleep at the wheel, and so he was trying to save the vehicle, so he came this way as he fell asleep and then tried to pull it back to the right, and then ended up hitting this mound of dirt. It's overgrown some now, but you can still see the spot where the nose of the van went in, and then he continued over the hill and dropped to this street below. This is the valley that my dad found himself in. I mean, it's a literal valley. He had a moment and he was in a valley. Have you ever found yourself in a valley where everything changed? Have you ever found yourself in a valley where everything changed and it paralyzed you? You were locked in. You were terrified of moving forward, and you were just wishing that you could go back. There's this interesting story in the Bible. It's in the book of Numbers. It takes place not long after Moses has led the nation of Israel out of Egypt. And at this point in their history, Israel's been promised a future. They think they know what's ahead of them. God, through Moses, had told them that they would inherit a land called Canaan, what the Bible describes as a land flowing with milk and honey, which was God's way of saying, this is a good land, I'm giving you a good thing. And so with that picture of their future in front of them, Moses enlists the help of 12 men. And he instructs them to go to Canaan, scout out the land, and then report back to him what they find. Now, according to Scripture, while they're on this journey, these 12 guys come to the entrance of the Promised Land, and it's a place called the Valley of Eshcol, which translates as the Valley of Clusters, as in clusters of grapes, as in fruit, as in good things, as in everything I told you I was going to give you, I'm still going to give you. But then they saw something else from the valley. They saw people living in the Promised Land, protected by these strong warriors, which means the promise didn't look like they expected it to look. And for the men in that valley, this insurmountable obstacle was a game changer. In fact, when they returned to camp, this is what they told Moses. It's recorded in Numbers 13:27 and 8. It says, when we went into the land in which you sent us, it does flow with milk and honey. There is fruit there. And they brought back some of the clusters. But then in the next verse, they say, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified, and they're very large, and we even saw descendants of Anak there. These were giants that had lived during that time. And then the Bible says they pressed Moses, saying, we can't go there. We can't move forward. You see, these were men who thought they knew where they were headed. They thought they knew what tomorrow held. They thought they knew what the promise looked like, but then something happened. They heard something, they saw something, they experienced something, and it changed everything. And as a result, they were paralyzed with fear, unable to move forward, wanting nothing else than to return to a place of safety and security. At least that was the case for 10 of the 12. But for 2 of the 12, a man named Joshua and a man named Caleb, the Valley of Eshcol represented something else. The Valley of Eshcol for these 2 was an opportunity for God to show himself faithful. In fact, while the others were reporting what could not be done, Joshua and Caleb were reporting what could be done. Numbers 13:30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. You see, these guys saw the same insurmountable obstacle from within the valley as the other 10, but their decision on what to do was completely different.
After we finally had time to process the report and the permanency of Sam's accident, we knew the decision on how to move forward wasn't going to be our decision to make. He was communicating with us now, and he had a clear say in what should be done.
The 3 of us Mom Ryan and I talked it over and came up with a script for how to present this to Dad. Basically, here's what the doctors are saying, here's what's at stake, and here's what you need to decide. We decided to ask Dad 2 questions. Do you want to live? Yes or no? And then a contrasting question like, would you rather die than suffer? That way we would be sure of a clear answer. So I asked Dad, do you want to live? He blinked twice, yes. Then I asked, Dad, would you rather die than be completely paralyzed? He blinked once, no. After a collective sigh of relief, I threw in, Dad, are you scared? 2 blinks, yes. He was scared, but he was prepared to fight.
In the book of Numbers, after the 12 returned and gave their reports, after each of them took their position to either give up or fight, it became clear what God wanted from them. If you were to read the rest of the story, you'd find that the 10 who gave up never got past the valley of Eshcol. They died long before that could ever happen. But the 2, Joshua and Caleb, they did. They came out on the other side of the valley. They received the promise. And while it looked different than they likely expected, while it took more time and work than they may have first anticipated, they finished the way God wanted them to finish. They finished strong. They finished with a fight. What valley are you facing today? What decision are you making in response to that valley? Are you going to retreat, or are you going to fight?
We were so excited to hear Sam say that he wanted to fight. He was believing for a miracle, and so were we. Regardless, though, of how things turned out, he wanted to live. Sam's always been this way. As I said earlier, we've owned our own business for years, and like any business, there are good years and there are bad years. When people used to ask Sam what he was good at, he would always say, I'm really good at starting over. In a lot of ways, this accident has just been one more opportunity for him to do that. And just like with every other time we've had to start over, we've seen improvements. Some have been small, but they've been improvements. Initially, improvements came in the form of just figuring out a better way to communicate with Sam. Scott had been reading a book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
The book was written by a guy who had locked-in syndrome. He wrote the book literally blinking out one letter at a time. He used a system where someone would read the alphabet out of order, putting the most used letters first. Then when they'd get to the letter he wanted, he would blink. So we tried it with Dad.
The first letter that we got out of Dad was D. We looked at each other in a bit of a nervous panic. We were all thinking the same thing. He's changed his mind. He's trying to tell us he wants to die. We were relieved, though, when we got the second letter, which was an R. Of course, at one point, we missed a letter, and we ended up with D-R-I-V, which made us think he was wanting to talk about while he was driving and the accident. But when it all came out, he was just trying to spell drink, D-R-I-N-K. He was thirsty.
We spent a lot of time waiting, and while we waited, we tried to encourage one another, and we tried to encourage Sam. The nurses made signs for him when he turned 65. It was so sweet. And we had so many visits from friends and family members, so many people praying. People were emailing, calling, texting, sending us messages on Facebook, and feeding us. The support was overwhelming, and we so appreciated it.
While Dad was in ICU, Gannon couldn't go see him. He was too young. So most days, I would go home from the hospital, I'd make a recording of my son's voice on my phone, and then I'd bring it back to the hospital. and I'd put it up to Dad's ear, and I would play it for him to try to inspire him.
Okay, Gannon, listen. I know you've been saying it. Grandpa. Say it real loud. Grandpa!
Those early days seemed like an eternity. We watched Sam come through one surgery to reconstruct his pelvis, another one to fuse his spine and skull together, and even procedures to put a trach in and a halo on him. But eventually, he became stable enough to be moved out of ICU and strong enough, unexpectedly, to begin doing things the doctors said he'd never do.
I remember walking into the hospital one day and Mom was just staring at me. She was there with her friend Sandy from Indiana, and I knew something had happened. I just didn't know if it was good or bad. But then she finally reached out and she said, "I couldn't tell you this over the phone, Ryan. I had to wait until you were here to see it for yourself. Your dad moved his finger." I thought she'd gone crazy. I thought Sandy had gone crazy. They both said they'd seen it. I thought they want to see this so badly, they're just imagining it. But then I walked into the room, and it took a while. I waited, but then I saw it too.
All right, Dad, let's see you move those fingers.
Get him up, honey. He's putting you in. Get him up. Work hard at it, honey. Concentrate. You're doing great.
Let's see you move them.
Are you doing it, honey? Your left hand.
Move that left hand. Move those fingers.
Yeah.
There it is. There it is. There it is.
And the
there
little
we go.
finger.
That's good, Dad.
Oh, man, honey.
That's great. That's great, Pops.
Slowly but surely, Sam was improving. First, it was moving a finger, then a hand, and a foot, and then he began to smile. That was awesome. Then he got to the point where he was forming words, mouthing our names, and oh, we celebrated each progress for sure. They eventually moved him out of the hospital and into a long-term care facility. And by summer, he was in Atlanta at the Shepherd Center, which was an answer to prayer in itself. The Shepherd Center is a world-renowned facility that gave Sam the opportunity to receive some much-needed therapy. Provided him with some assistive technology, too. They got him into a chair that he could operate himself, that he was able to write his grandson Gannon around him. And he also got a computer that he could use to type out what he wanted to say and to email us. He began emailing us. There are times it seems like there's no progress, but then there are other times when he makes great strides and just keeps moving forward. In recent months, we've taken trips back to our house in Tennessee that we're preparing to move back into. And in the meantime, we've been staying at a facility called Safe Haven, where they're taking great care of Sam. We're also at church every Sunday, and we're even able to watch our youngest grandson while his mom and dad go out on dates. Sam's in therapy now 4 days a week with a terrific team of therapists. And believe it or not, he's even beginning to find his voice again.
We're here at the East Ridge Life Care Center. Sam May is getting his speech therapy for the day. Dad, what do you got to say for us?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Dad, this ain't a Verizon commercial, buddy. Mom, why don't you hop in there? We'll have him read a passage out of the Bible for everybody.
Now, William is able to do more than we can or imagine. May the Lord Amen.
Awesome, Dad. Hey, anything you want to say to everybody watching this that's been supporting you through this whole thing?
Thank you for me. I am believing.
Can you hear what Grandpa's saying? Come here.
Oh, Dad.
What did he say? What did he say? The Valley of Eshcol. It's a place where everything changes. It's a place where you feel paralyzed. It's a place where you're afraid to move forward, but it's also a place of decision. It's a place where you can say, we can't do it, or we certainly can. You see, just because you hear something, you see something, or experience something doesn't mean the promise isn't still alive or that the future can't be bright. More than likely, what it means is it's simply going to take a different form. It may mean you'll have to work a little harder. It may mean you'll have to work a lot harder. But when you're in the valley, the call is to always say, we can certainly do it.
In the years that I've worked for Sam, being out on a job site by yourself, things would happen. You'd be frustrated, get upset about things, and so I'd always call him, get his encouragement, and he always ended the phone conversation with, keep her going, babe. And I've never forgot that. And when he had his accident, and I would go visit him, I would always tell him the same thing in encouragement. Keep her going, babe.
Last year, I was given some of the medical reports from Sam's doctors. There was one report in particular that just jumped right out at me. It mentioned how early on there were talks of withdrawing care during those early days when we were first told that he wouldn't improve. It also mentioned how they had to resuscitate Sam multiple times. And then near the end of the report, and I love how this verifies our testimony, it said that in their opinion, Sam's survival up to that point had been miraculous, but to expect further improvement might be wishful thinking. That report was written just 1 month after the accident, and at that time, all Sam had done was blink.
How do you move from the valley to the promise? You trust in the love and grace and strength of your Creator. You choose to live by faith, not fear. And you get really, really good at starting over. You put one foot in front of the other, and you walk, no matter how deep the valley, no matter how long it takes, you just keep going. You keep fighting. You keep stepping forward and moving until you get all the way out of the valley.